My name is Elena Cross, and I'm 29 years old. Last winter, I died almost. The doctors said I might not make it through the night. My parents' response? She's not really ours. Let her go. They left me in that hospital bed, bleeding and broken. But I didn't die. I survived. And by the time they showed up to steal what wasn't theirs, they found something waiting. Not my body, but a letter. One they never saw coming. Before I tell you everything, tell me, where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. I live in Providence, Rhode Island now, a city that breathes with the quiet hum of industry and history, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection I once inhabited. I co-founded a medical AI startup, and most of my days are a relentless, exhilarating blur of coding, research, and funding calls. It's a life I built, brick by hard-won brick, born from a desire to solve problems, to heal, to create something tangible and good. My office, cluttered with whiteboards and discarded coffee cups, smells of old paper and new ideas. It's a scent of purpose, a stark, refreshing change from the cloying perfume and stale air of expectation that once filled my childhood home. My parents? Margaret and Daniel Cross. They still exist somewhere in my periphery, prominent in their circles, polished in their public appearances, utterly poisonous behind closed doors. My sister, Lauren, remains their pride, a Harvard-educated surgeon, a gleaming trophy in their meticulously curated life. Me? I was always the anomaly. The quiet one. The adopted one. Exceptional on paper, perhaps a string of academic achievements and accolades, but at home, I was simply invisible. A ghost in their meticulously curated life, a shadow they occasionally acknowledged but never truly saw. My current life, vibrant and demanding, is a testament to the fact that I am no longer that shadow. I am the architect of my own light. I learned I was adopted at 13. It wasn't a gentle conversation, a thoughtful sit-down explanation designed to reassure a child. It was an accident, a brutal, casual revelation that ripped through my carefully constructed world. I had come home early from school that day, a mild fever sending me back to the quiet solace of my room. The front door was ajar, a small detail I barely registered until I heard their voices. Sharp. Unfiltered. Rising from the living room, seeping through the walls like a chilling mist. She's not yours either, Margaret, I heard my father, Daniel, say, his voice a low, guttural growl that still sends shivers down my spine, echoing in the quiet moments of the night. She was just a solution. A problem solved. A way to quiet the gossip, to complete the picture. I froze in the hallway, my small backpack slipping from my shoulder, clattering softly against the polished hardwood floor, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the sudden, suffocating silence that followed his words. It wasn't just the words, it was the chilling detachment in their tone, a clinical assessment of a situation, not a discussion about a human being. I wasn't a child, a daughter. I was merely a transaction, a fix, a convenient placeholder in their perfect family narrative. A biological niece no one else wanted, passed along like a forgotten parcel. They took me in, filed the necessary paperwork, and made sure I smiled in every Christmas card, a perfect prop in their perfect family portrait. But love? That wasn't part of the deal. Not then. Not ever. I was an object, a convenient addition to their facade, never a true part of their hearts. The house, always too quiet for a family, always humming with a subtle tension I couldn't name, felt even emptier after that, filled only with the deafening echoes of words I was never meant to hear. The air itself seemed to thicken with the unspoken truth, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. From that day on, every glance, every strained conversation, every forced smile felt like a cruel confirmation of my status as an outsider, a permanent guest in a home that was never truly mine. Last year, the fragile illusion of my life shattered, not with a gentle crack, but with a violent, deafening explosion. I was hit by a drunk driver. The force of the impact ripped through my world, twisting metal and flesh, leaving me in a crumpled heap of agony. The last thing I remembered was the screech of tires, the blinding flash of headlights, and then a profound, suffocating darkness. I awoke days later, or so I was told, in a world that was a blur of fluorescent lights, the rhythmic beeping of machines, and hushed, clinical voices. Massive brain trauma, broken ribs, internal bleeding, my body was a symphony of screaming pain, each breath a fresh wave of agony. A coma so deep, they later told me, that I hovered on the precipice, unsure if I'd ever find my way back to consciousness. The hospital called my parents. They were next of kin, my legal guardians, the people who were supposed to be there, to sign the papers, to authorize the life-saving measures. But when the doctors explained the critical nature of my injuries, when they pleaded for authorization for life-saving surgery, their response was a chilling echo of that overheard conversation years ago, a brutal testament to their true nature. My mother's voice, cold and devoid of emotion, cut through the clinical jargon the nurse was relaying over the phone. "She's not our real daughter," Margaret stated, as if discussing a faulty appliance, a broken toy. My father, Daniel, echoed her, his words equally devoid of human warmth, a flat, final pronouncement, "We owe her nothing." And then they hung up. They left me in that hospital bed, a nameless patient, bleeding and broken, abandoned to the sterile efficiency of a medical system that couldn't save me without their consent. The silence that followed their decision was more deafening than any scream, a void where love and responsibility should have been. But a miracle happened, or perhaps a convergence of extraordinary kindness. Doctors scrambled, caught between their professional oath to save a life and the legal constraints imposed by my so-called parents. A nurse, a quiet woman with kind, compassionate eyes named Emily, defied protocols. She stayed by my side, her presence a warm anchor in the icy current of my unconsciousness. She whispered music and words of hope into my unconscious mind, tending to me as if I were her own child, her touch a lifeline. And then there was Sasha. My best friend, my business partner, the fiercest ally a person could ask for. She flew in overnight from across the country, a whirlwind of frantic energy and fierce, protective loyalty. When she heard what had happened, when she learned of my parents' callous abandonment, a silent, blazing fury settled over her. She navigated the labyrinthine hospital bureaucracy, found legal loopholes, cut through red tape, and signed everything. Every form, every consent, every waiver. She became my temporary guardian, my lifeline. She argued, she pleaded, she threatened legal action, all to ensure I received the care I desperately needed. She saved me. It wasn't my family who stood by me in my darkest hour, but the people who chose to. The people who saw a human being in need, not a burden, not a problem, but a life worth fighting for. I woke up days later. The world was still a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed voices, but this time, the blur had edges, and the voices were more distinct. Tubes snaked from my chest, my arms were strapped down, and my bones screamed in protest with every shallow breath, a cacophony of pain that seemed to emanate from every nerve ending. The physical agony was a constant, throbbing presence, a dull roar beneath the surface of my consciousness, a persistent reminder of the brutal impact that had nearly claimed my life. But nothing, absolutely nothing, hurt more than hearing how they walked out. It wasn't just an emotional wound, a figurative abandonment that could be dismissed as abstract pain. It was literal, physical. The stark reality of their decision sliced deeper than any surgical incision. When my life hung in the balance, when I desperately needed parents, they acted like strangers, like cold, calculating investors cutting their losses, a disposable asset they were willing to jettison. The betrayal was a physical ache, a new layer of pain on top of the broken ribs and the fractured skull, a chilling understanding that settled deep in my core. I was truly alone in their eyes. But that wasn't the worst part. A week later, still frail, still tethered to machines that monitored my every fragile beat, I learned of their next, contemptible move. They didn't show up at the hospital to check on my recovery, to see if their solution had survived, if the problem they had ignored had miraculously resolved itself. Oh no. They showed up somewhere else entirely. At my late grandmother's house. The house she had lovingly bequeathed to me in her will, the only true inheritance I had ever known, a place filled with warm memories and the scent of baking bread. They came to collect. To claim what they believed was theirs by default, what they thought was now ripe for the taking, assuming I wouldn't live to stop them. Their greedy hands, outstretched for what they considered unearned wealth, were reaching for the last tangible link I had to a past that held any genuine warmth or connection. Their avarice, so transparent, so utterly devoid of empathy, solidified into a hard, cold knot in my gut. This wasn't just about money, it was about power, about control, about erasing any trace of me, any claim I might have had to a legacy that wasn't theirs. Their actions were a second, calculated attempt to annihilate me, to leave me with nothing. But I wasn't there, not physically. My body was still confined to that hospital bed, slowly mending, regaining strength inch by agonizing inch, a testament to Sasha's fierce loyalty and Emily's tender care. What they found instead, neatly placed on the antique mahogany desk in my grandmother's study, was a sealed envelope. It wasn't an empty gesture, it was a carefully constructed ambush, a meticulously planned retort born from the depths of my quiet fury. Inside, waiting for them like a coiled viper, were copies of the legal adoption papers, explicitly detailing the terms of my custody and their responsibilities, the precise obligations they had so brazenly shirked. And then, the footage. Surveillance footage, meticulously collected from discreet cameras I had installed long ago, a silent, invisible defense against their subtle manipulations and insidious gaslighting. The cameras captured them, their faces a mask of calculated indifference, as they spoke to the hospital staff, as they denied me care, as they uttered those chilling words, "She's not our real daughter. We owe her nothing." Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every cold shoulder, recorded for posterity, an undeniable timestamp of their heartlessness. And finally, the letter. Written in my own hand, my scrawl surprisingly steady despite the tremors that often shook me, it began with words that were not a plea, but a declaration, a stark statement of intent. I am no longer your secret. I am your consequence. My grandmother's estate lawyer, a formidable woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, had her instructions. She had seen through their thinly veiled charade years ago, sensing the undercurrent of resentment and manipulation. She had been my quiet confidant, my protector, helping me to set up these safeguards. The surveillance cameras, strategically placed, captured every moment of their arrival, their eager anticipation, the glint of greed in their eyes as they stepped into what they believed was their inheritance. They captured their shock as they opened the envelope, the dawning horror on their faces as they processed what they saw, what they read. The camera lingered on Lauren's face, my sister's face, as she watched the footage. The initial confusion giving way to disbelief, then a profound, gut-wrenching horror. Her shoulders slumped, her jaw slackened, and her eyes, usually so bright and confident, filled with a dawning, terrible understanding. The air in the room, thick with their initial hubris, was suddenly suffocating, choked with the weight of their exposed truth. It was a pivotal moment, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of their perfect family, revealing the rotten core beneath. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by their ragged breaths and the soft whir of the camera recording their undoing. They stood there, caught in the web of their own making, their carefully cultivated image shattering into 1,000 pieces before their very eyes. They tried to lie, of course. When confronted by the estate lawyer, by the irrefutable evidence of the adoption papers, the damning footage, and my meticulously crafted letter, their voices shifted. The initial shock gave way to a frantic scramble for damage control. Their tones became laced with feigned confusion and practiced grief, a pathetic performance for an audience of one astute lawyer. They spoke of being misunderstood, of grieving in their own unique way, of a lapse in judgment due to the emotional strain of a family crisis. Their words were hollow, ringing with the false sincerity of seasoned performers, desperate to regain control of a narrative that was rapidly slipping through their grasp. They tried to paint themselves as victims, caught in a tragic misunderstanding, But the evidence was too damning, too undeniable, a fortress built of their own cruel words and actions. Their carefully constructed edifice of respectability began to crumble under the weight of their exposed truth. Lauren, however, was different. She stood apart from their frantic attempts at damage control, her eyes fixed on the cold, hard proof of their betrayal. She watched the footage again, her face pale, her lips trembling, the realization sinking in with devastating clarity. Then a raw whisper, barely audible, yet cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel, "You left her to die." It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of profound disbelief, a realization that shattered her carefully constructed reality, the comfortable illusion of her perfect family. For the first time, she saw the truth, not just about me, the quiet, adopted sister she barely knew, but about them. Her perfect parents. The people she had idealized her entire life. Their true colors were finally revealed, stark and ugly, stripped bare of all pretense. A deep, guttural sound escaped her, a choked sob. She turned and walked out that day, leaving them speechless, their carefully rehearsed lies crumbling around them, their self-serving narrative reduced to dust. Later that evening, my phone, heavy in my still weakened hand, vibrated with an incoming call. It was Lauren. Her voice was hoarse, thick with unshed tears, trembling with a fragile vulnerability I had never heard before. "I didn't know, Elena," she choked out, the words laced with genuine anguish. "I swear I didn't know how deep, how truly cold they were." And maybe, just maybe, for the first time in my life, I believed her. The anger, the bitter resentment that had festered within me for so long, that had built walls around my heart, softened just a fraction. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall, a hint of something different. A glimmer of hope for a future I hadn't dared to imagine, a connection that wasn't born of obligation, but of shared understanding and a painful, necessary truth. The weight on my chest, a constant pressure for so many years, eased, just a little. The legal battle that ensued was mercifully brief and utterly decisive. The courts sided with me, their judgment swift and unequivocal. How could they not? The evidence was overwhelming, the intent clear, their abandonment documented, their greed undeniable. My grandmother's inheritance, the last tangible link to a loving past, a beacon of warmth in a cold world, was rightfully mine. Margaret and Daniel, stripped of their expected windfall and exposed for their cruelty, their public image tarnished beyond repair, sold their sprawling, empty house and retreated into a self-pitying exile in Florida. They blamed everyone but themselves, clinging to their distorted narrative of victimhood, unable to comprehend the consequences of their own actions. Their calls eventually stopped, their presence in my life diminishing to a faint echo, then nothing at all. And I found, to my surprise, that I didn't miss it. The silence was not empty, it was peaceful. Lauren, true to her word, moved in with me. It was tentative at first, two strangers learning to navigate a shared space, a shared history, tentatively building bridges over the chasm of their parents' making. We had to learn each other, the quiet nuances of our personalities, the rhythms of our lives. But slowly, carefully, we began to build something new, something real. A true sisterhood, forged not in shared blood, but in the ashes of betrayal and the quiet strength of honesty. Sasha, my unwavering friend, my fierce protector, visits weekly, her booming laughter filling the once silent house, chasing away any lingering shadows. And Emily, the nurse who whispered hope into my coma, she's become a cherished part of our chosen family, joining us for Sunday dinners, her quiet strength a comforting presence, her gentle wisdom a guiding light. We laugh now. We heal. We share stories, dreams, and the simple, profound comfort of being seen, truly seen, for who we are, flaws and all. Our meals are filled with genuine conversation, not strained silence. Our evenings are filled with easy camaraderie, not stifling expectation. I stopped needing them to love me. That hollow ache, the desperate yearning for their approval, the constant striving for a recognition that would never come, finally faded, leaving behind a quiet sense of liberation. Because I learned something powerful, something that no amount of money or prestige could ever buy, something that resonated deeper than any wound. You don't need their permission to be whole. You only need your truth. My truth, raw and unvarnished, set me free. It carved out a space for real connections, real love, a life built on authenticity rather than pretense. I am not the same person I was before. The scars remain, subtle reminders of the darkness I faced, of the depths of human cruelty. But they are no longer gaping wounds. They are faded etchings, symbols of survival. I don't hold on to the bitterness. It's a heavy cloak, woven with resentment and anger, and I've chosen to shed it, to leave it behind. My resolution isn't about punishment. It's about peace. A profound, self-made peace I found not by getting even, but by moving on, by building a life so rich in genuine connection, so overflowing with quiet joy and fierce independence, that their absence is no longer a wound, but a silent testament to my resilience. My past no longer defines me, it forged me. Have you found your way back from betrayal? Have you reclaimed your own truth, the one that sets you free?